In preparation for the opening of the next phase of the Sydney Metro, the New South Wales government has released an updated version of Sydney's railway map, reflecting the quite significant changes coming to the network. And while a lot of the new map might be what we expected, it does contain a few surprises, as well as a few more questionable decisions. So what are the changes coming to Sydney's rail map, and what will they mean for the way Sydney's rail network operates? Well, the biggest changes coming to the map are because of the soon-to-be opened extension of Sydney Metro Northwest. The extension, called Sydney Metro City, will bring the current Northwest Metro that runs from Tallawong to Chatswood into the city, via stations at Crow's Nest, Victoria Cross, Barangaroo, Martin Place, Gadigal and Central. Then out of the CBD to Sydenham via station at Waterloo. I have a separate video where I go into this phase of the Metro project in more detail. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the description. But in anticipation of the extension's opening, it's now been added to Sydney's rail map using the Metro's hollow blue coloured line. It was present on the previous versions of the map, although as a dashed grey line to indicate it was under construction. Along with this, where the Tallawong to Chatswood line had previously just been marked with a round blue M for Metro and was simply called the Metro Northwest line, the line has now been given a name that better matches Transport for New South Wales' letter and number naming convention and sets us up for future Metro lines being added to the map. That name being the M1 Northwest and Bankstown line. It is worth noting that Sydney also uses the letter M to describe motorways, with the M1 motorway being the main road up to Newcastle, so there is a little potential for confusion there. Speaking of confusion, I do have a small issue with the way the line is being portrayed on the map. That being that it's shown running parallel to the North Shore line. And typically, when lines are shown running parallel in a Metro-style map, it's an indication that the lines run parallel in real life as well, often just with different stopping patterns. And this is true for Sydney's map in a large number of places, a key example being the large trunk of lines running west from Central. There's 4 of them shown in parallel here, and in real life these lines do run on sets of parallel tracks, or even share the same tracks. They just have different destinations and stop at different stations along that route. But while the M1 line is shown running parallel to the North Shore line on the map, that's completely not the case in real life, where the line has its own unique route and its stops, Crow's Nest and Victoria Cross, are definitely not just there for a unique stopping pattern, and are some distance away from the North Shore line tracks. Now, not only is showing the line parallel on the map misleading, but it also reduces the prominence of the new Metro line. My day job is in design, and as a designer I can tell you the importance of white space to help design elements stand out. Placing the Metro line parallel to the other lines reduces the amount of white space around it, so the fancy new line that the government should want us to get excited about instead gets lost in all the other colours. This is particularly true for the new Barangaroo station, which is just left tucked in the corner of the CBD, almost to get forgotten about. In other cities where lines might run through similar areas and even have some of the same stops, but don't actually run parallel, this is usually visible on their Metro map. In London, where this style of Metro map originates, the newly opened Elizabeth line runs in vaguely the same direction and even has many of the same stops as the older Central line. But on their map, space is used to clearly indicate these lines don't actually run parallel. And Sydney actually already does this for the Waterloo station of the Metro, so I'm not sure why it wasn't done for all of it. In my view, simply adding some white space between the M1 line and the North Shore line would not only be more accurate, but should reduce confusion as well. This is hopefully something that can be addressed in the next version of the map. But now that my design rant's over, besides the addition of the new Metro line, what else is happening to Sydney's train network? Well, the next big change is coming to the T3 line. After the city section of the Metro is opened, the next step is to extend the line to Bankstown along the existing tracks currently used by the T3 line. This means all current T3 stations between Sydenham and Bankstown will be taken over by the Metro. But the T3 line doesn't end at Bankstown, so what will happen to all the stations beyond it? Well, they will still be part of the T3, but instead of trains serving the line running to the city via Bankstown, they will now run towards Lidcombe and then onto the city using the main Western Railway line. Which, interestingly, is the same route used by the old Inner West line, shown here in lilac on this old Sydney rail map, from back when the network was still called City Rail. But with this change in route for the T3 also comes a change in name. Currently the line's full name is the T3 Bankstown line, but as it will no longer be stopping at Bankstown, it will become the T3 Liverpool and Inner West line. It's not super clear yet if the updated line will offer express services like the current T2 line does, but it does look like it could see a boost in service frequency at the stations along the line between Lidcombe and Redfern. Speaking of the T2, its name will also be changed slightly, from the T2 Inner West and Leppington line to the T2 Leppington and Inner West line, I guess to be more consistent with the way the T3 will now be named. That said, even with the T3 line being rerouted, there will still be 2 stations left behind by the old Bankstown line that aren't being converted to a metro, those being Yaguna and Birong. In my previous video on the metro, I did express a wish that they had just extended the metro conversion 2 or 3 stops further to include these stations, with a potential interchange at Regent's Park or Sefton. But as that's not happening, at least for the time being, these 2 stations will be served instead by their own small line. That line being the return of the T6, which has been absent from the map for the last couple of years. The original T6 line, which ran from Clyde to Carlingford, was closed in 2020 for the line to be converted into light rail as part of the Parramatta Light Rail project. The line's closure left an odd numerical gap in Sydney's train line names between the T5 and the T7, but with its return, that's finally been fixed. The new T6 will run from Bankstown, where it will provide an interchange with the upcoming Metro South West line, to Yaguna and Birong stations, then to Regent's Park for an interchange with the updated T3 line, and then finally to Barala and then Lidcombe, where passengers can change for the T1, T2, T3 and T7 lines. The T6's new full name will be the T6 Lidcombe and Bankstown line, and will be coloured brown on the map. This new colour has proved to be a bit controversial, with some on Reddit and Twitter likening it to, well, poo. But in my opinion, it's really not that bad. I might have personally picked a slightly different shade of brown, but it's still better than adding another blue coloured line to the mix. If this T6 used the original T6's colour, we would have 4 blue coloured lines on the map, and that would just start getting messy. But now that I've talked about what's happening to the stations beyond Bankstown, what about those between Bankstown and Sydenham? Well, the next few months are going to be pretty unpleasant for commuters using those stations. From the middle of the year, these stations are set to close for 12 to 14 months to allow for the work to convert the line into a metro, as part of the extension of the M1 line out to Bankstown. While this work is happening, these stations will be served by replacement buses instead, and that's being shown on the rail map, with the pink colour of the line coming from the pink Station Link buses, much like those promoted by Lee Lin Chin and used when the Epping to Chatswood rail line was closed for its conversion to metro. Unfortunately for commuters using these buses, some travel times are expected to be almost double what they were while the line is shut. Now, one of the more surprising changes coming about because of the new metro is what's happening to Erskineville and St Peters stations. Currently these stations sit on the T3 line between Sydenham and Central, but the new metro won't be running along this track, and instead will use a new tunnel to get from Sydenham to Central via Waterloo. So what's going to happen to these 2 stations? Well, many people, myself included, expected them to be added to the T4 line. And that's because T4 trains already run through both these stations, although without stopping. But when there's track work on the T3 line, it's not uncommon for T4 trains to make additional stops at St Peters and Erskineville to keep them in use. So it's a little bit of a surprise to see that on the new map, these stations have been given to the T8 line instead. This means that when T8 trains head out of the city, a portion of the trains will skip the underground airport rail link, and will instead proceed above ground via Redfern, Erskineville, St Peters and Sydenham. This isn't entirely without precedent. During peak hours, a handful of T8 services already use this above ground route, and these services do already stop at Redfern, St Peters and Sydenham, although not typically at Erskineville. The T8 should also have a bit more capacity to accommodate these new stopping patterns, with it no longer sharing tracks with the T3 line through the city circle via Museum. The final major changes to talk about with Sydney's rail map are the addition of 2 other upcoming metro lines, both shown in grey dashed lines. One of these being the Sydney Metro West that will run from Hunter Street in the Sydney CBD to Parramatta and Westmead in the city's west, via new stations at Pyrmont, The Bays, Five Dock, Burwood North, North Strathfield and Olympic Park. Again, I have a separate video where I talk more in depth about this line if you want to know more. I'll link to it in the description. The other under construction line being shown is the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport line, which will run from the existing station at St Mary's to Orchard Hills, Luddenham, the Airport Business Park and the airport terminal before terminating at the so-called Aerotropolis precinct. When completed, this line will become Sydney's second airport rail connection, which will hopefully be a bit of a wake-up call to the transport planners down in Melbourne. But with all these changes coming to Sydney's rail map, I do want to call out the one thing I think it's missing: the light rail. Sydney already has 3 light rail lines, and a 4th, the Parramatta Light Rail, is not far away from opening. And this map is not just a Sydney Trains map or a Sydney Metro map. As its title says, it's the Sydney Rail map, and I think light rail should be included in that. From a passenger experience perspective, there honestly isn't even that much of a difference between light rail and the other rail modes. They all operate at mostly turn up and go frequencies, they all have dedicated rights of way so passengers don't have to worry about getting stuck in traffic, and they all have purpose-built stops with seating, departure boards and shelter. Light rail even gets called out on the train announcements when pulling into a station with a light rail interchange, which is not done for buses. While adding it would make the city section of the map in particular a bit more crowded, I think it would provide a more accurate portrayal of how you can get around Sydney by rail. Ultimately, while we live in a world where more and more people are turning to apps like Google Maps and TripView to plan their journeys, and some see metro maps as becoming a relic of the past, they still form an important part of a transport network's identity, and do help many people learn and navigate a city's transport network. The changes being made to Sydney's map are exciting, and I'm glad to see, as the new map reflects, the city continue its work on expanding its rail network. Well, I hope you liked the video. I want to give a shout out to the channel Sydney Trains Vlogs, where I sourced a lot of the background content for it. I would also like to hear all your thoughts on the updated map. Like, do you think the brown T6 really looks that bad? If you did enjoy the video, consider giving it a like and subscribing if you haven't already. I'm City Moose, and as always, thanks for watching.